Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Good morning, Morgan Streetman, Pat George. So good to see both of you.
Good morning, you two. Great to see you as well. Can't wait till we're back on the same side of the glass here.
Checking in coronavirus free?
As far as I'm aware, I'm coronavirus free. Of course, you could have the coronavirus and be asymptomatic.
Right.
That's a lot of people's situation, apparently.
Now, this is the time when we do a quick look back, and I feel like we haven't been doing a quick look back as of late, but that could be a good thing, because if we do a quick look back, we really don't know what day it is, do we?
That's right. It's hard to even keep up, and we've been doing so many looks every direction that we haven't, you're right, we haven't always been announcing that we're doing a quick look back. But we've been looking all directions, folks. We've been looking backwards, forwards, and both sides. And by the way, if you've been looking at anything and you want to get on the line with us and talk to us about it, the number to call is 888-404-1010. And we've heard from some listeners over the past couple of weeks who've had some interesting things to say. So welcome you to the show. If you want to give us a call, we'd love to hear from you. But one of the things we wanted to do is take a look at some of the facts, and I got this from a listener, and this isn't one of the listeners who called, but this was such a great little rundown of facts that I just kind of wanted to run through it with folks. You know, one of the stories that's been so popular in this whole coronavirus situation has been that it came from some kind of a bat soup that was served in Wuhan, China. And we've talked about that a bunch on this show, and we've talked about reasons why we think that the evidence tends to point more to the virus possibly coming out of one of the high-level labs that exist in Wuhan, China, that being the Wuhan Institute of Virology and or the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC in China. So both of those main labs exist in Wuhan. And so, we just tend to look at it and say, wow, that could be the more likely source. And there's some facts to back that up. But one of the things I wanted to cover was what this gentleman sent me. He sent me some communications, and he sent me a list of facts, and I just wanted to run through them with you, and this will serve as our quick look back. But he says, fact one, and by the way, these are all supported by news stories, news articles, and we've even covered most or all of these here on the show at different times. Fact one, distance of bat origin makes outbreak unlikely in Wuhan. Now, this is because the bats that this coronavirus came from are apparently these horseshoe bats that exist in Yunnan, China, and the distance from Yunnan to Wuhan is 1,292 kilometers, or a little more than 800 miles as the crow flies, as we put it. So if the virus traveled from the bats that were 800 miles away to Wuhan, and by the way, we've got nothing in between going on, what he pointed out is the Wuhan Institute of Virology is less than a mile from that wet market. So just looking at the distance, one might tend to lean towards thinking maybe it came from the Institute of Virology rather than from horseshoe bats that live 1,000 miles away. Fact two, no vendor, and this has been confirmed. This is things that the media won't tell you as they're painting their stories. No vendor sold bats at the wet market. I don't even know if you've heard that. I don't know if you know that, but there were lots of animals there, pangolins and other exotic animals, but no bats.
What's interesting about that is when someone describes the wet market, and you just described pangolins and other sorts of exotic animals that we certainly wouldn't think of eating, we just make that logical, or maybe it's illogical leap that, of course they sell bats there.
Sure. They're eating anteaters and, little rats and things. Well, of course they're eating bats, right? Because they got to have bats there. So that's what you would think. But apparently, and there have been news articles done on this, and people from Wuhan have been interviewed who have said they don't serve bats in that wet market. The bat soup is not a big delicacy in Wuhan. Now, it is in other places in the Far East, but not in Wuhan. Fact three, and there are 6 total facts. We're almost halfway through his list, which is a great list. I really think he did a fantastic job putting this together. Fact three, scientists from China claim that it's likely the outbreak came from that lab. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but we talked about this, that there were, and this is back, I think, sometime in February, when the South China University of Technology came out with a study from a couple of its PhD students, And that study concluded that the killer coronavirus probably originated from a laboratory in Wuhan. And we pointed out the fact that that study wouldn't likely have been released or publicized without approval from the Chinese Communist Party. Now, subsequently, that all that stuff was pulled off the web, so that maybe causes you to question whether or not it did have approval, and now maybe they're trying to cover it up. But the big picture point is that scientists in China have also looked at this and said it probably came from that lab, where, by the way, tests on the coronavirus were ongoing for many years. We talked about that last week. Okay, fact 4. For years, scientists worried about the Wuhan virus lab causing an outbreak. Now, this is true. We talked about this last week. You know, there were tests on these coronaviruses and all different kinds of coronaviruses, of which there, I'm sure, are thousands of iterations, were going on there at that Wuhan lab. They went on from, I believe it was about 2014 to about 2017 were the times that the official testing was going on, and it was U.S. funded, by the way, in part. But then in 2018, a group from the U.S. Embassy over there actually went to the lab itself and visited, and then they sent back cables to the State Department saying this lab is not following safety protocols. They're not properly managing these viruses. It's an accident waiting to happen, basically, in so many words. That's what they said. It's an accident waiting to happen. So for years, scientists have worried that this particular lab could have an accident and release one of these very dangerous coronaviruses that it was studying.
Is this lab still open?
You know, that's a great question. I believe, as far as I'm aware, it is, because I know we've asked to go and look at it. I mean, the State Department has requested, and China has refused to allow us to come and look at the lab. But you just have to wonder, as quick as I mean, you know, the wet market's gone. They bulldozed the wet market. So are they in the process of bulldozing the lab? I mean, I wouldn't put it past them. They just make this whole thing disappear.
Nothing happened here.
Airbrush it out of all the pictures, just like Stalin used to do when he would kill people. Just airbrush them out of the pictures. It never existed. I don't know what person you're talking about. Okay, fact 5. The first case of coronavirus could not be linked to the wet market. Now, this is very interesting. Now, the first case that we're aware of, and we really don't know what patient 0 was, the very first case of the coronavirus, but the first case that we're aware of surfaced on December 1st. And, you know, remember there was a study by the Lancet, which is a British medical journal, and it studied the first 41 people that were hospitalized with the coronavirus, and there were 13 of those cases that had absolutely no link to the wet market, including the first person in that study. So the first person that we know about to have had this had never been to the wet market, didn't go to the wet market, didn't get food there. So what is much more likely, at least the hypothesis would be, that somebody from the lab, a worker at the lab, or somebody they came in contact with pretty quickly after getting the virus, and in an accident, let's say, then went to the wet market and spread it around the wet market. Okay. Fact 6. China likely killed, and I love this one. China likely killed 2 of the 3 doctors who initially reported the outbreak. And we can't say for sure they killed them, because here it's another case of these people have just disappeared. They've just disappeared. Also, the communist leadership has imposed a severe lockdown on any more internal reports addressing the outbreak. They've also destroyed the initial lab samples in the Wuhan lab, so nobody could link the outbreak to the government-sponsored lab. Now, does that sound like a country that wants to investigate this and get to the bottom of it, or does it sound like they already know what really happened and they want to cover it up?
Sounds more like a cover-up.
Sounds like a cover-up to me, too. So this is one of those cases, folks, where you can just sort of apply a little bit of common sense to the situation, and you can't just take what the media is trying to feed you at face value. And boy, are they trying to feed us this nonsense. And I wouldn't say they make it sound so reasonable, but, you know, as we say often on the show, a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth, and they just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and after a while it starts to sink into your consciousness, and you sort of have a hard time not believing it, because it's kind of like what all the authorities are saying. You know, all the newspaper, all the talking heads are saying, well, this clearly came out. And remember, we had a study in the journal Nature that even said, oh, this obviously came from transmission from an animal, and here are the reasons, and it was a very complicated and kind of a convoluted argument. And, you got people saying, look, this is just way above my pay grade to figure out. And look, the scientists are saying, the authorities are saying that it came from the animal. So who am I to say that it didn't? And all I would say is you got to apply your common sense a little bit. If you really dive into this on the animal transmission, we've talked about this on the show, the virus never makes it on the first attempt. And so you have evidence of the previous attempts. And if it really was jumping from animals to humans, wouldn't it have done it in Yunnan, China, where those bats live and where they are actively hunted by a whole group of people that hunt and eat those bats? That's where you would have seen it jump, not 1,000 miles away in Wuhan.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show, and we're going through, that was a great list of facts that you just shared with us.
Wasn't that?
Really dispute what the story is, the mainstream media story that we hear as to how this all started.
I thought it was just a fantastic little thing. That was put together by one of our listeners. So props to our listener, and thanks for sending that in. I really enjoyed going through it. And it's great to see people thinking for themselves, doing their own research. And I just read really the top line headlines he'd given me, because each one of those facts he had underneath it, he had an analysis, and he had the news stories and everything else. It was, in fact, I hate to say it, Pat George, but I offered him a job as a producer. I was like, you got to come on and be one of the producers of our show here.
A student of Morgan Streetman College.
He's a great guy, though. I met him a few months ago, and I've been keeping up with him. He's been communicating with me, and he's a very, very interesting guy, and really enjoyed talking to him. So, well, we got so many things to cover, and as we were talking about during the break, we always have to make cuts during the show in terms of what we cover, because I've got about 3 or 4 hours of content, and we've only got an hour of showtime. And so last week, I wanted to get into talking some about oil, because I kind of saw, although I didn't completely realize what was coming, but I kind of saw what was coming with crude oil last week, and we may yet talk about that on the show today. The other thing I wanted to talk about that we may be able to get to on the show today was a study that had come out about sunlight having a major effect on coronavirus and killing the coronavirus, but we didn't get to that. And, of course, that became big news toward the end of the week when President Trump brought it up during his press conference.
Open the beaches, if that's true.
Well, that's right. Well, you look back at the Spanish flu, the 1917, 18, 19 epidemic, and what did they do to treat those people? And we talked about this on the show before, but up in Boston, they set up an outdoor field hospital because they found back then, and of course, they didn't have all of the scientific technology and knowledge that we have today, but they knew back then. And, I mean, what do we say? We say sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? I mean, that's like a common phrase that we use. Why do we use that? Because, I mean, we know that already, that sunlight kills viruses, bacteria, and other things, and in fact kills them very quickly. So one of the best treatments is being out in the sun. And add on top of that, there's apparently some kind of antimicrobial action to fresh air. Just to fresh air. There's and we talked about this, I think, on the show before, but the fresh air cofactor that actually helps to kill some of these viruses just by being outside in the fresh air.
And, that's why they tell you let your child play in dirt. That's why you don't have these fears that in that dirt is all kinds of crazy diseases that they could get because the sunlight's probably doing something. There are germs nonetheless, but the sunlight is definitely doing something.
And when this all first started, people were yelling, take vitamin D to help us.
Yeah. Well, vitamin D is a great. I mean, if you don't know about vitamin D, you ought to look into vitamin D. It's not just a vitamin. It's really more like a hormone, and it really boosts your immune system, and it's fundamental. So, I've been heavy duty on the vitamin D for years, and I don't, who knows? Knock on wood, but I don't seem to get sick quite as often as other people do. In fact, sometimes I go years without getting sick. And I try to keep my vitamin D levels up. Even though I live in a state where I have opportunity to get quite a bit of sunlight, I still supplement with supplements.
Shows people are so deficient in vitamin D. That's usually something we all have is low vitamin D, even though we live in Florida.
Yeah.
And all these little immune system tips that we're sharing now, you're going to want to keep them in mind as we move forward and start to interact with people again because our immune systems are going to be weak.
Oh, totally. And we had a video that hopefully we'll get a chance to get to that video that you guys found for us, and you being Roxanne and Pat, And it's really interesting what they have to say about the immune system and how just being under quarantine, being inside, like you're saying, Roxanne, not interacting with other people, not encountering germs on our day-to-day life outside the home. So that means there's a kind of a fixed universe of germs within our home, and we're not out there sharing germs with other people and thus developing and building up our immune systems, how that in and of itself is going to cause people to get sick and to have problems.
We need some inoculation right about now.
That's right. That's right. Well, okay, so there's a whole group of stories that we wanted to try to cover here, and we'll see if we can get through them and see if we can kind of do them a little bit of justice. And that involves the treatments for the coronavirus. Now, you know, a treatment that we've talked about quite a bit here on the show is hydroxychloroquine. Now, let me just take a minute and say that that particular treatment doesn't go by itself. So you don't just take hydroxychloroquine. The treatment protocol, and the one that's been applied by doctors successfully across the world, thousands of patients, including a very well-renowned French epidemiologist who kind of gets treated, in my opinion, by the media like he's some kind of a nut job. But in reality, he's one of the top epidemiologists in the entire world, named Didier Raoult. He has a protocol, and that doctor in New York has a protocol, and they involve three things. It's hydroxychloroquine, the Z-Pak, azithromycin, and zinc. And so it's a three-pronged strategy that's been working very well for people. And, of course, we know in late March, the FDA started allowing, or rather approved, the off-label use of that to treat coronavirus on an emergency basis. And, of course, there is supposed to be this ongoing testing. So what do we see last week? And all during this time, you know, any mention of hydroxychloroquine anywhere is treated by the mainstream media and the social media sycophants as being something reckless. You can't even say the word. Don't tell people about that. We don't know for sure that works. We haven't had a double-blind placebo study, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've kind of covered that story quite a bit on this show. But what's interesting is last week a study came out, and it's really a study. It's not like a double-blind controlled study. It's actually a survey. I'm sorry, not a study. It's a survey. It's a review of medical records, and it came out of the VA. And basically the people in the VA that they were giving this to were the sickest people. So we're giving it to the very sickest people. They didn't establish a true control group because they still gave part of the control group some of the stack. They didn't give the group that they were testing this on, the hydroxychloroquine, they didn't give them the full stack, the zinc and other things. So it was just a very flawed study, but it came out and showed that, oh, you know what, hydroxychloroquine doesn't improve. It doesn't improve the situation. It may actually cause more deaths. May actually cause more deaths. And boy, did the media just start talking about this right away. I mean, you heard it in the press conferences with President Trump. They're asking him about this study. So now all of a sudden we could talk about it right now. If it fails and we could put it up in President Trump's face as a failure, then you're allowed to talk about it. If it succeeds, you can't mention it. It's reckless. But that study from the VA was highly flawed. Even the VA itself came out, and I was going to see if I still had the article handy here because I was going to read you what he said. But anyway, the director of the VA came out and said that actually it is working. But the point is, this particular survey was analyzed, and basically they weren't following study protocols. So they were picking only the sickest people to give this to, people who were already intubated. And by the way, the time to start taking hydroxychloroquine is not when you're about to die. That is not going to do you as much good. In fact, it's not going to do you much good. Once what they call the cytokine storm starts, and that's your immune system's overreaction. If you want to just understand what that is, your immune system is overreacting to the virus, kind of like starting to create follow-on trauma in your body, in the blood, from the immune system essentially turning on your own body. That's called the cytokine storm. And you say, well, how does that happen? You know, the immune system and everything. Well, think about these autoimmune diseases, you know, where it's basically your immune system, like lupus, which also happens to be treated by hydroxychloroquine. But lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, other things that are autoimmune type diseases is where your immune system actually starts attacking your own body. Well, in this case, and this was something that was noted in the Spanish flu epidemic, and that is the cytokine storm. Your immune system goes into overdrive. It all happens very quickly, and it winds up putting you on a very steep downward trajectory. So that's not the time you want to start taking hydroxychloroquine. You want to take it when you first get sick, and then it has a much better chance of having a positive effect. But if you get out there and just look up Didier Raoult, it's Didier Raoult is how you spell his name, and check into the studies that he's doing because, I mean, he's treated a bunch of people in one of his studies that he's done where he's treated with this hydroxychloroquine. He treated 80 patients, and he had improvement in every case except for one case, which is a very sick 86-year-old person who had an advanced form of the coronavirus already when the treatment started. So other than that, out of 80 people, he saw improvement in all of the other cases. Now, there's a couple of other stories that I wanted to cover on this. One of them involves something President Trump said last week, and we're going to play the clip for you if we can get all this in. I mean, because we got several clips we'd like to play for you. We're going to play the clip for you. And then I want to tell you about what Christina Cuomo, Chris Cuomo's wife, has to say about her treatment protocol. And the silence is deafening because nobody's getting on her tail about talking about these things that haven't been double-blind tested, haven't been put through scientific studies. They're not FDA approved, and yet here she is talking about them. This is her treatment protocol, and this is how the rich can fight coronavirus. We'll tell you about that.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, we're discussing different ways that they are treating individuals with COVID-19 and having complications from it who are hospitalized from it. We've seen a variety of treatments. Some are received well by the public, others not so much.
Well, and I did locate, because I've only got about 30 stories here today. So, I mean, it's just like I've got piles everywhere on the table in here. But I did locate that story I was trying to find just a few minutes ago, which is where the Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Robert Wilkie, last week actually talked about the study that we were just talking about, the hydroxychloroquine study that's been used on veterans and how that came out. And he said, quote, "That's an observational study. It's not a clinical study. It was done on a small number of veterans, sadly, those of whom were in the last stages of life, and the drug was given to them." He said also, I think this is so interesting because the media, the mainstream media, doesn't report this part of it. He said, the drug has been working on middle-age and younger veterans. By that, he meant that it was stopping the progression of COVID-19 in those people. So, you know, again, the Secretary of the VA says that hydroxychloroquine has been working in most people, except for the people that are already about to die, the sickest of the sick. And if you give it to them, then it's just not going to work, most likely, because, frankly, at that point, nothing's going to work. All right, got a few other interesting things. A story that's not receiving any coverage at all, but is very interesting, and that is the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, or USM Red, actually has been studying a compound, and this one hasn't received any mention in the news, and that's an extract known as oleandrin. Now, this has been being studied for a couple of years at Fort Detrick, which is our primary bioweapons laboratory in this country, and they've actually found that non-toxic concentrations of oleandrin are efficacious at slowing and halting viral growth in tissue culture assays. Now, they've been testing it on other viruses other than the coronavirus, but at this point, they're talking about moving that into tests on the coronavirus. So, you know, we've got some options out there. It's not just hydroxychloroquine, but now there's other things that may be effective at stopping the replication and growth of viruses. And another of those things, and this is something that President Trump talked about last week during his press briefings, and I wanted to play the clip for you just so you could hear what he actually had to say, because it's been portrayed that he said something very much different by the mainstream media. But let's just listen to what President Trump, and by the way, when he said this, because I was listening live, This caught my ear. And I said, gosh, it almost sounds like he's going a little bit out on a limb there. And then I said to myself, President Trump never does this without knowing something that everybody else doesn't really know right now. And so I think he's putting bait out there to let the media go berserk on him, and then it's going to be proved that he was actually right. That's what my thought process was at the time, and would you guess that that's what's actually happened? But let's just start with the clip to begin with of President Trump at his press briefing last week.
A question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
Get the right folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
So that's what he actually said. Now, what the mainstream media says is that President Trump is instructing people to inject bleach or inject isopropyl alcohol or inject Lysol. And then you saw the follow-on with the companies themselves coming out and saying, please don't ingest Lysol to kill the coronavirus. And we also saw the stories of, cases in New York of people ingesting Lysol at the president's recommendation, yada, yada, yada. Now, he actually said disinfectant, right, which we've already talked about. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Now, what happened after that was somebody discovered that there's actually a company working on this, and it's not really an injection per se, but it's putting light down inside the human body. And I can tell you very briefly how it works, but this company is called A2 Bioscience, and it's AYTU, and it's pronounced A2 Bioscience. They're actually working right now with Cedars-Sinai Hospital and the FDA to try and test this new technology they've created called Healight. Now, this technology works by they insert what is called a catheter, but it obviously doesn't go where most of us think a catheter goes. But they insert a catheter, which has got LED lights on it, down the tracheal tube from somebody who's been intubated. So the catheter goes down the center of the tube where the air is flowing, but obviously doesn't touch the body itself because the tube is around it. Now, what they've done is they've isolated UVA. There are three spectra in UV light. It's UVA, UVB, and UVC. And a lot of people say, well, UV light causes cancer. And when they're talking about UVC, they're correct. That's the most powerful, energetic form of UV light. But apparently, UVA actually doesn't cause any negative effects on the cells of a human body, like what we're talking about. So UVA is actually safe. So what they've done is they've isolated UVA light. They only have that spectrum of light coming out of the LED lights in this catheter that they put down the tracheal tube, and they found some good success with this actually killing the virus off in your throat and then that beginning to lead you to a potential recovery. Now, again, this is under testing right now. Nothing's been proved. They're working on this. But I believe that President Trump may have been aware of that, and that may have been exactly what he was talking about, because what happened shortly after that? So people started posting and saying, hey, this isn't as crazy as it sounds. There's actually a company that's already testing this exact technology, putting the light into the human body, testing it right now with the FDA. And oh, by the way, they're working with Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in New York. I mean, this is not, some fringe technology. And this is called Healight. And so then what happens? Then a New York Times reporter reports them to social media. And social media immediately starts pulling their videos down off of YouTube. They've got a very simple video that shows how the Healight works. You can still go out there and find this on other video sites, but it's been pulled off of YouTube. And then what happens next? Twitter suspends their account. Now, this is a legitimate, publicly traded biotechnology firm that's currently in testing with a new technology that may actually help people. They're not making any claims that they're not allowed to make. They're not even saying this will do anything to the coronavirus for sure. They're just in the process of testing it, and they're working on peer-reviewed studies. And for that, and because the president mentioned them, they're basically getting banned from social media because, and the mainstream media, the New York Times reporters are the ones who are causing this ban to be implemented because they don't want you to find this information because they want to be able to get up on the rooftops and say, President Trump is a maniac. He was wrong. He's just making stuff up. This is just insane. Putting light in the human body. That's insane. No one's ever thought of that. When in reality, it's actually under active testing right now. I mean, isn't that crazy? And so the assault on the freedom of thought and the freedom of information and the truth, it's unbelievable, shocking.
It's kind of sad that hydroxychloroquine, whatever role it may play in helping people combat this, it was shut down the second the president said, I have a hunch about this, or I have some good intuition about this. I have high hopes for this, however he put it.
Right.
And the same thing is happening now. So if he gives his not even stamp of approval, just, hey, I hope this works sort of vibe, then it's going to be attacked.
If he just mentions something, right? I mean, they're like, they've got to destroy it. I mean, how about that? I mean, just to stop for a minute, how about that state representative from Detroit, Karen Whitsett, who actually got the coronavirus and started taking hydroxychloroquine, demanded that her doctor give it to her because she had heard President Trump say something about it. And she demanded it from her doctor. Doctor gave it to her. She credits that with saving her life. She credits the president with saving her life by informing her about this possible treatment, which she then used. Now, I don't know if you've seen the latest, but do you see that the Democrats in her state and the state legislature are going to censor her? Mm-hmm. They're going to censure her for mentioning this, for saying that she used this treatment and then praising the president for having given her the idea of it. They're going to censure her.
Well, you heard about the new political Trump masks that came out. You know, the Trump across the front of the mask.
Uh-huh.
And now the mainstream media and the Democrats are saying we don't have to wear masks anymore.
No one's allowed to wear masks. Well, let's just finish this out. Let's just round this out, and let's look at what Christina Cuomos has to say. Because remember, Chris Cuomo got the virus, and then he claimed he was quarantined in his basement, even though we know he wasn't because there was a police report filed about how he was out at his house, which hasn't been built yet, by the way, but out in the Hamptons at his vacation home that he's in the process of building right now. And a guy rode up on his bicycle and said, hey, wait a minute, you're breaking quarantine. And Chris Cuomo even talked about this, about how dare somebody challenge him. And he had some pretty colorful language that he used. But anyway, Chris Cuomo, now his wife and his child both got coronavirus. Okay, I guess he wasn't staying quarantined in the basement. But now let's see, his wife has been posting about what she's done to fight the coronavirus. And there's no mainstream media backlash to this. I can't believe she posts this. I mean, this is so irresponsible, right? And she calls it the Cuomo's Corona Protocol. Now, she touts on this protocol, on this social media or blog post that she's got, she touts oxygenated herbs such as Echinacea osha, and she also talks about these various doctors that she's had come out to her house in the Hamptons to give various treatments, including a vitamin IV drip with magnesium, NAC, vitamin C, lysine, proline, B-complex, folic acid, zinc, selenium, glutathione, and caffeine. That's all in her vitamin drip, IV drip, by the way. And by the way, this is not cheap. This is probably $100 to maybe up to $700 a session. And you've also got the charge for having the doctor come out to your house, which wouldn't it be nice? I mean, don't we all wish we could be treated this way? What else is she doing? She's taking bleach baths. She's adding a half a cup of bleach to her bath water to, quote, I'm quoting her, combat the radiation and metals in my system and oxygenate it. And she says she's doing this on the advice of her doctor. She's also using some kind of electronic field generator to energize her body. And she's also using an indoor sauna, and she's daring to talk about all this stuff that she's doing. Put her in jail.
Well, we're gearing up to go out there. We're revving up to go out there and talk a little bit about Joe Biden. However, we need to hit on some world news as well as some world of the intelligence. U.S. intelligence, I should say.
Well, give me a second to talk about the elephant in the room, okay? And that is...
Hey.
What the heck is going on with Kim Jong-un?
What
right?
is?
We don't know. We don't know yet.
Go on, tell us. Well, I'll find out in about 10 days if you say it now.
I think you're right. I mean, look, I've got to believe something's going on because of the news reports, and there not being any sort of what they would call a proof of life coming out of North Korea. I mean, wouldn't it be so easy to have him take a photo of him on his balcony waving or something like that? None of that's coming out. And, who knows what we can trust of these news reports? But there are news reports of a lot of military activity going on in the North Korean capital, lots of helicopter flights everywhere. There's a lot of rumors apparently spreading in the North Korean capital, and people are buying up different items, particularly things that are imported from other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems possible that something very serious may have happened to Kim Jong-un. Now, the story is that he was basically walking and had a massive heart attack, and then one of his doctors in North Korea made the decision to go ahead and proceed with surgery, but because he was working on the great leader, who's believed, at least in the mythology is that he's a god, his hands were shaking very, very severely. And
should have went with the robot.
He should have gone with the robot. And then he didn't do the surgery properly, and Kim Jong-un wound up basically a vegetable after heart surgery. So that's the story that's out there. We don't know if that's true or not. We got to wait for some kind of confirmation. And of course, I doubt that we ever get the full truth coming out of a place like China or North Korea. The other thing we wanted to just briefly touch on, we don't have any time to do this justice, but we have heard, first of all, there was some Brady material released to General Flynn last week. We've heard from Maria Bartiromo yesterday. She's saying that General Flynn is going to be completely exonerated this week. Now, the Brady material is under seal, but Sidney Powell, General Flynn's attorney, has seen it, and she has that it proves that General Flynn was completely innocent. I mean, I can't believe, I hope folks are upset about this, because this is a person who served their country honorably for decades at the highest level, and it sounds like, and which is what we've been telling you the whole time, that he's the victim of a made-up witch hunt, that they went after this guy, and it was all made up. He didn't actually lie to the FBI, and then they put his son under pressure and said, well, we're going to indict your son for some of his involvement with some of these Turkish clients, and if you don't plead to something, we're going to go after your son. And he cracked, which, I mean, he ran out of money, couldn't afford the lawyers, and I mean, who can? And he cracked and pleaded, and now he's trying to withdraw his plea, and we'll see if that's allowed to happen. It certainly should be, but regardless of whether he's allowed to withdraw it, the government could just dismiss the case. The Department of Justice, or Just Us, as Sidney Powell puts it, they could dismiss the case against him, and they should dismiss the case. So we'll see if that happens this week. Got some other things that are going on. John Durham, we haven't heard from him yet, and he's apparently added a pretty significant actual trial prosecutor to his team just last week. The chief of violent crimes and narcotics trafficking section of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., an individual named Anthony Scarpelli, has now been added to the team, so it looks like he could be gearing up for indictments and trial, and we can only hope so because, these people have to be held accountable at some level or they're going to do it again and again and again if they get away with it. All right, speaking of getting away with it, Joe Biden's been getting away for years with invading other people's personal space and getting very handsy with people. And there's plenty of photographs and videos of this.
How's he going to survive in the post-pandemic era with social distancing?
How's he going to be allowed to come out of his basement? I mean, first of all, the guy can't even put a sentence together. And in some ways, you almost start to feel bad for him when you see him because it's so obvious he's experiencing major cognitive decline. But then we remember who we're talking about here, and we really can't feel bad for a person like this. But, just this past March 25th, somebody came out and made a sexual assault allegation against Joe Biden. for something that happened back in 1993 when he was a senator from Delaware, and this person was one of his Senate staffers, a young lady at the time. And apparently she was asked to take him a gym bag. Then all of a sudden she realized she was in the room alone with him. He kind of pushed her up against a wall, and he assaulted her. I won't give you all the details, but he assaulted her. And she came out with this story on March 25th. Now, of course, the New York Times doesn't report that for 19 days. They don't report it for 19 days. CNN doesn't report it for 24 days. Now, if you want to contrast that with what happened to Brett Kavanaugh, right, with Christine Blasey Ford and the allegations, do you know that CNN published almost 700 articles about the Kavanaugh allegations in 19 days from the day they were made? Within 19 days, they had 700 articles that they published, and they were talking about it nonstop on the network. They didn't mention this allegation once for 24 days. Jake Tapper just interviewed some of the Democrat vice presidential potential running mates for Joe Biden, never asked them once about these allegations made by this young lady, Tara Reid. Well, now what's happened? Now we've learned there is actually some proof out there of these allegations, and that is Tara Reid's mother called the Larry King Show, Larry King Live, if you remember that show, back in 1993, about these very allegations. We're going to play the clip for you here.
We're back. A couple more phone calls on this very important topic. Our guests are former United States Senator Howard Baker, Richard Allen, former National Security Advisor, and Lois Romano of the Washington Post. San Luis Obispo, California. Hello.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Well, now, but these are the people who do come to the Lois Romanos, right? The staff worker who says, I want to let you know about what's going on, either with my boss or the guy down the hall.
And a lot of these people have a sense of obligation. They feel that this public official should be accountable if it's something wrong.
They're whistleblowers to the press.
Exactly.
So that, and by the way, this young lady who's now obviously a number of years older than she was back then, she's confirmed that's her mother's voice. And also, we know her mother did live in San Luis Obispo, California. So she called the Larry King Show, very respectful, but talked about her daughter having a problem. And what could she do about it besides going to the press? Because she wasn't trying to make it a press thing. And you can understand an assault like this, you don't really want to be necessarily a big press thing. You'd rather have it dealt with another way. But Tara Reid says she couldn't get anybody in Joe Biden's office to deal with this. So, I mean, just think about this. This is the guy that the Democrats are running for president, and nobody will even talk about this. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.